latest episode of The Claus Corner. Today I continue my conversation with author, producer, and creative consultant Randy Schmidt. We have been discussing his latest documentary chronicling the life of Karen Carpenter and the Carpenters. It's entitled Karen Carpenter, Starving for Perfection. We last left off where Karen had finally admitted that she had a problem and decided to see a doctor. So Randy, welcome back to The Claus Corner. Thank you very much for coming back and doing part two.
Absolutely. Thank you for understanding.
Oh no,
Got
not
a
at
little
all.
choked up last time.
Oh yeah. For people who didn't see part one, this is flu season. It's December. He was kind of sick. I was kind of sick. I was just getting over it. So decided to both feel better, and now we decided to end part two because there's so much to talk about with the Carpenters. I mean, I did not realize until I saw your documentary and read your book that how much is actually involved in their life. Yeah. So we last left off. Her marriage ended, I think it was around the end of 1981, if I'm correct. And then she said, all right, I finally admit I do have a problem. Let's get a doctor. There's a couple problems with that, though, because he wasn't actually a doctor, as we discussed at the end of part one. He was more of a counselor.
Counselor, psychotherapist, and Karen mainly reached out to him because he had sort of had his 15 minutes of fame with a book and a movie that came out in 1981, I believe. The book and the movie were titled The Best Little Girl in the World. And Karen read it, from what I understand. I mean, it was kind of in private, of course, because she wasn't talking to a lot of people about it at that time, but she was reading this book because she identified so closely with the character in it and what she was going through. And there wasn't a lot of mainstream publications having to do with anorexia or eating disorders at that time. So she saw this guy as, you know, if he did this book, if he did this made for TV movie, then he must be the expert. And that's who she thought she needed to go and see.
Okay, so she reached out to him, and he accepted her, and it was like, from what we were talking about last time, it was close to $2,000. Was it a week? It was a lot of money for what they were doing. It was,
I would have to confirm on the dollar amounts and stuff, but I do know that she kind of told him, here's what I'm going to do. Like,
yeah.
I'm going to come and see you. I want to see you this many times a week. And it was completely different than what he did with any other patients or any other, I guess, clients or whatever you might say. But she basically said to her friends, I'm going to go get fixed. I think she saw that, you know, Richard had entered a 6-week program for his substance abuse, and that's what it was going to take for her. You know, she could set aside a year for this, and even though she was advised that it would, you know, take much more time than that, she was really set on getting this kicked in the time that she had.
Yeah. From what I just looked at my notes, it was 5 times a week, $2,000 a month, not a week. So you know, that's, you said it could vary, but it was up there. So did this counselor / doctor, did he include the family in this therapy? Did he get everybody involved? Richard, Agnes, Harold?
At a certain point, yes, he did. And part of his approach was to go back, of course, to childhood traumas and things like that, which of course made the Carpenter family very nervous and made Agnes feel like, you know, are they saying we're the ones to blame for this? And this was a point in time, as Cynthia Gibb, the actress who played her in the TV movie, points out in our documentary, that you know, people weren't talking about therapy. If you know, she said, I think when people talked about therapy back then, you know, only crazy people need therapy. The rest of us deal with our problems. And that's kind of the way that I think Agnes and the family looked at this, as, you know, if we've got problems, we deal with them within and with each other, which they weren't doing either. But yeah, they did finally agree to come to New York. The family did, Richard and Harold and Agnes. And one other person was present, Phil Ramone's wife, Karen Itchy Ramone. And she's the one who relayed the story to me, but it mirrors what happened in the TV movie almost exactly. You know, Agnes said basically that it was a bunch of crap, that, you know, she didn't put any stock into psychiatry like this, that she was upset that he had addressed her by her first name. He called her Agnes, and she said, young man, you know, we're from the North, and you don't speak to a lady, you know, twice your age or whatever, the age of your mother. with that kind of familiarity. And so it was just a really uncomfortable situation for Karen, something that I think she probably was dreading, but hoped on some level that it would, make progress, but it really kind of backfired. And as they showed in the TV movie, Agnes was asked to tell Karen that she loved her. And Harold did so. The whole family was asked this. Richard did so. And that's when Agnes just kind of rolled her eyes at the whole thing and said, she knows we love her. We don't have to say it.
Wow.
And it was just really a sad situation, I think, for Karen to have to go through that. And yeah, exactly as portrayed in the TV movie, though, sometimes even word for word from what her friend Itchy told me.
Wow, that's really sad. And you know what's even sadder is because Karen came at a time where, first, you mentioned people didn't talk about therapy. Second, a time nobody really knew too much about anorexia or nervosa or even talked about it if they knew about it. So she really had no chance at all. I mean, everything was kept under the rug. It was too embarrassing. They didn't want to admit that anybody had a problem. And she was just reaching out for help. And back then, either people didn't know or they just like, you know what, come on, get over it. So
Yeah, because even the experts in the field at that time hadn't been experts
yeah,
for very long. And so I think it was new for everybody. And there was nothing like what there is now. I mean, and it's thanks to Karen's death, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at that,
yeah.
that things began to change after that. And that there are, even as far as inpatient clinics where people can go. And it's not at all the same way. I mean, it's similarly frustrating. I think some families are still dealing with feeling like they're at the end of their ropes as far as, there's nothing else we can do or we've tried everything. But the research is there at least now. And there are some approaches that work for some people.
Yep. All right. So you mentioned what Agnes thought about the doctor slash counselor, but there was a point in time when Richard lost faith in him. Why was that?
I think that's probably when the doctor said something to Richard to the effect of, after she goes through and sorts through all of these things, and she may come out a different person. She may not even want to sing. And I think that understandably Richard was, scoffing at that,
Yeah.
this is somebody who has one of the most fantastic voices in the world, and of course she's going to want to sing, but who knows? She might have been able to take things and put priorities in order and set boundaries and things in her life that she'd never been able to before. And I think that's what he meant. I don't think he meant she's not going to love music anymore.
Yeah.
But just that, she's going to have a mind of her own and make decisions for herself.
During that time when you were speaking with Itchy, did she see a difference in Karen, that she was becoming stronger, not only physically, but mentally becoming stronger, like making her own decisions and wanting to be better?
Unfortunately, no. Itchy
No.
was witness to Karen still doing a lot of the behind the scenes hiding of things. A lot of times there were laxatives and pills and things that she had told them that she was no longer taking, that Itchy would find hidden places around either the hotel room or at the time that she lived with them in at their home. She was finding them in like the fruit bowls and things, just ridiculous, in the pillowcases, and things were just she was so secretive, and she was still doing this even whenever she was going to Levenkron's office during that time. And Itchy confronted her about it, and she even, I think, took a bottle of pills and gave them to Levenkron and said, she's still doing this. And she said that Karen didn't really trust her after that, because I think she wanted her to keep the secret for her or whatever, but she kind of went and told on her or whatever, and that upset Karen.
Yeah, I just feel so bad because, I mean, her husband, what he did to her, what her family was doing to her, and now she felt like her best friend, the only person she had in her life, was a traitor, which she really wasn't. She was just trying to do it to help her. I mean, it's like it seemed like the whole world was against her, which really wasn't the truth, but in her perspective, it was. So there was a time when she was hospitalized. She was entered into a hospital, and then they gave her intravenous, and she gained 12 pounds. She became a lot more confident in several days, and then she's gained more weight. She felt great. And that's when she said she gave herself a timeline until Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
So at that
Yeah.
point, what
She
was her
hadn't
family?
really made much progress was the thing. And she was actually even getting worse at a certain point where this is when Levenkron brought in a medical doctor to admit her, and she went into Lenox Hill
Yeah.
Hospital at that time. But yeah, over a period of a couple of months there, she gained around 30 pounds.
Wow.
And I think she saw that as, okay, this is the progress that everybody's been wanting to see from me. And she could, kind of show off and say, hey, look at me, look how well I'm doing, even though things hadn't necessarily changed inside.
Yeah. And I'm sure she was still not eating, but like as we talked about in part one, she'd push the food to the side or say, "Oh, you got to try this. This is delicious." I'm sure she was still doing that. Still, like you said, up here, she wasn't feeling comfortable with her weight, even though she wanted people to think she was.
Yeah, or she'd show off, eating a lot and then excuse herself to the restroom. And
Yeah.
there were still situations like that even after she came back from New York, where she, scared Agnes because she went away from the table and came back quite a while later and was dazed and confused and disoriented. And yeah, she was continuing to cause the same problems, even though she, I think, really on some level wanted to be done with this.
Yeah.
Was just so much a part of who she was by that point that she was just going through the same motions she was used to.
Did her family or friends try to enter her back into the hospital? Like, you know what, you're not cured. You need to go back.
Richard said that to her whenever, because she came home, at Thanksgiving, like she said she was going to give herself kind of that timeline. And that's when she was telling everybody, hey, look at me, I've gained 30 pounds. She had told Dionne Warwick likes to tell the story that she says, look at me, I've got an ass now, and how she's going to have to go and buy new clothes. Um, but Richard kind of saw through that, I think, and I'm sure some others did as well. But it was such a quick turnaround that nobody was saying, we've got to get you back in the hospital. I think they were glad to see that she had put on some weight, but he said that you could just see in her eyes that she wasn't well. And I totally agree. The pictures of her during that time, even though her body had filled out some, the eyes are just black and lifeless, and it's kind of hard to explain, but she did not look well, even though she had, I think at the time of her death she was like 108 pounds,
Wow.
which is still somewhat in the lower end of the normal range for a woman her height and age. But yeah, she was continuing to do all the things that had got her there in the first place.
What was the lowest she ever got?
um The lowest I've ever seen recorded anywhere or given anywhere is when she entered the hospital in at the end of 81, beginning of 82, and she got down to 77 pounds at that
Wow.
time.
And there was a time when Karen thought she was better and she said, Richard, let's go back in the studio. What was Richard's reaction?
You're not well enough to do that. That's not what we need to do at this point. She did record some stuff when she came back from New York in a couple of weeks break, but not after not after she came back at Thanksgiving 82. She was saying to even Herb Alpert, she was saying, I'm back. I want to record. I want to do concert tours. I think she was just trying to give everybody this, okay, Karen's back. Everything's good. We can get back to work kind of reset. And that's what Olivia Newton-John said too, is she thought she's got the marriage behind her now, she's got all of this behind her, and now she can look forward to the future. And they're just, as soon as everybody was finally starting to think, okay, she might be okay, that's when the news came.
Yeah. Well, also, Karen was so worried about disappointing everyone. She was the ultimate people pleaser. She was worried that like all the money people were losing with the recording, with the touring. I think that was in the back of her head too. It's like, I don't want to disappoint anybody, which is sad because she should be thinking of herself first. Was that the first time where she ever stood up to Richard? Because I know she screamed at him saying, well, what about your problem with Quaaludes?
I don't know that it was the first. I'm sure there were plenty of instances that Richard hasn't shared with other people. That's just one that he has recalled, where she was very adamant about, I supported you, she said, whenever you were dealing with your problem, and now you're going behind my back and telling people I don't look well. She was very upset that he wasn't, telling everybody she's fine, like
Yeah.
she was telling them she was fine.
And as you mentioned, the year was around 82, and that was the year when Olivia Newton-John was doing her physical tour, and she was going to have Karen play drums on at least some of her songs. But what happened there?
I think that Karen was I mean, it wasn't in any shape to be out on stage, and of course, drumming and everything would have taken a lot of energy from her, and she hadn't really drummed in quite a while, maybe since even like around the solo album, or possibly during the last the Made in America album sessions. She might have toyed around with them or something, but she hadn't. Um, that wasn't something that she was like really up on, and Olivia and her would say, oh, well, we have to do this, we have to record a song together, or
Yeah.
you got to come along with me, and we'll bring you out and spotlight, and you can do something with the drums, and say hi to the audience or whatever. But yeah, it never happened. She was, I think, maybe for a couple of weeks on tour with Olivia, and just behind the scenes is where she remained.
Yeah. Again, I feel so bad because, as we mentioned before, she always thought of herself as a drummer first, and that's where she felt most comfortable, and a singer second. I mean, she would have, if she was healthy, she would have had the time of her life, and she loved Olivia. Olivia loved her. She could have had the best time on tour. It's just, unfortunately, it didn't work out like that. I wish she was able to do that. But it wasn't too much longer after that. If you can correct me on the timeline, was when she was upstairs and her maid came in. And what did her maid find?
There was a point in time that she was actually, this particular thing happened at her condo where she lived in Century City, and she was found just lying down in the closet, and the maid came in and checked on her. Karen, are you okay? What's going on? And she's told her, she was again kind of disoriented, and that she had gotten dizzy, that she just got tired and laid down to rest. And that I think she mentioned, I don't know if she mentioned it to the maid at that time, but she mentioned to other people around that same time that she thought that her heart hurt. I think she was just exhausted. I think her body had been through so much, and then she was back home and trying to keep up appearances, and yeah, I think there's so much going on there that she had no idea how
Yeah,
to deal with it.
her body was just so, like as you mentioned, so tired after everything it's been through. At that time, was she living at home with Harold and Agnes?
She was not. She had moved back into her own apartment in Century City,
Okay.
but she would come down from time to time to Downey and stay with her parents instead of driving back, which is why she was at her parents' home whenever she passed.
Yeah. Well, there's a scene. It's a scene from the movie that's in your documentary, and it has Agnes as Karen's walking upstairs, and she stops Karen. Karen, I just wanted to say, I love you. Is there any documentation that that ever did happen?
We interviewed Barry Morrow, who was the screenwriter for the TV movie, and he explained that it was so heartbreaking for them to learn that that wasn't necessarily something that ever happened, that they couldn't even imagine leaving the viewer with such a horrible ending to the story,
Yeah.
and that was completely created to give the viewer kind of a wrapping up, in a little bit of a bow, just a little bit of an optimistic ending, but that it wasn't based in any way in truth. She stopped Karen on the stairs and told her, I love you, and Karen said it back, and of course it's a beautiful ending, and you think, wow, she finally said it or whatever. But
Yeah.
unfortunately there's no story like that.
Yeah. I think it's kind of ironic. The woman that played Agnes in the movie is the same one that played Nurse Ratchet in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I love that.
It's
Perfect
so
casting.
interesting. They said that Richard had worked so hard to cut a lot of the things out of the film that made his mother look bad,
Yeah.
but then when Joseph Sargent came in and cast Louise Fletcher in that role, it kind of made every line that she said, have a little bit of a creepy factor to it because, she's. He explained that Barry Morrow said, any line that she says, anything she delivers, all she has to say is Karen, and it has this, creepiness to it because of who she is and who she had played. So that definitely, I think, had some not so subtle undertones to it.
So the night that she finally passed away, was she staying at Harold and Agnes's house?
She did. She stayed there. She'd gone down and to Downey and gone out to dinner with her parents. And the plan was that she was supposed to get some kind of or go look for a new washer dryer set or something for her apartment. And in true Carpenter fashion, they were going to go to Jimco, which was, the place of choice. You always go to the old reliable, hometown Jimco. And but they went to dinner, they came back, they watched some TV together, and she went to bed early that night. And it was the next morning that the parents heard Karen, get up. They could hear there were some sliding closet doors in the room above them where Karen had stayed. And she apparently had come down, plugged in the coffee pot, set out glasses for them and cereal bowls and that sort of thing, and went back upstairs. And so Agnes got up and woke up Harold and said, Karen's up. And then they went and called for Karen, and there was no answer. And it's a big enough house that they ended up, they had kind of a room to room thing with the phones there. So Agnes rang the upstairs room from the kitchen to tell her, breakfast is ready or whatever. And it just continued to ring and ring. So she went to the stairs, went up, and she discovered Karen had collapsed once again. In the closet, kind of, she said the same sort of thing. She kind of laid down, looked like she got tired and just laid right down. Not a big dramatic collapse or where she was injured or anything, but like she just felt tired or dizzy or whatever, and she laid down there in the closet. And that's when Agnes screamed for Harold and to call the paramedics, and that's kind of the beginning of the end there. They ended up rushing her to Downey Memorial Hospital and worked on her for quite a long time. But there are people who think that she was actually pretty much already deceased there at the house.
Yep. Well, what makes me so angry about that story, or so sad about it too, is that, as you said, Agnes found her. And according to, it was either your book or in a documentary or both, Agnes became hysterical, screaming because her heart was beating once every 10 seconds. Where was this care and concern for her when she was alive? She never, it seems like, according to what, you're telling me, that Karen really never saw that, but it seems like when she passed away, she really was hysterically crazy, crying, Harold, get the paramedics. And I just wish Karen actually saw how much her mother really did care for her and did love her.
Yeah, I think any parent would have a similar reaction to being in that moment. And unfortunately, it was terribly hard for Agnes to relay any of that when it wasn't, demanded.
Yeah. What about, I'm sure Harold was just as devastated.
Harold, I know we talked about last time how he was a very quiet guy, man of very few words. One of the things that kind of sticks in my mind, the Carpenter's secretary told me that she went into the music room there at the house at one point, and there were kind of surround speakers, and that he was listening to Karen singing "I'll Be Home for Christmas" with tears streaming down his face. And it was, I'm sure, a huge shock to everybody. They knew that Karen was not well, but I don't think that they knew that that was a possibility, because nobody had died from that, at least nobody known, celebrity wise or anything like that, so that they couldn't point to it and say, hey, look what happened to so and so, you've got to stop doing this. Karen became that person.
Yeah. And as we mentioned in part one, the mother had to live with that guilt because I think there's a part of her where she said, she goes, I just want to let you know, I'm not the one that killed Karen. So there's obviously a part of her that thinks that she was a part of it and she felt guilty about that. So maybe that was part of the reason she was so hysterical, besides, losing her daughter. But so what
Like,
was
yeah,
yeah,
like we can't let this happen. It can't,
yeah,
she can't die because, I haven't said the things I need to say, or I haven't done the things that I know I
yeah,
needed to have done, that kind of thing.
yeah. Well, it's a good story for people that whose parents are alive now or people that you love now. Let them know how much you love them before that happens. So, what was the actual cause of death?
The cause of death on the coroner's report was emetine cardiotoxicity,
Hmm.
which is a fancy way of saying poisoning by ipecac. And anorexia nervosa was listed as the second cause. Um, and so, this is something I think that the family didn't want to admit, that Karen had continued to cause herself to, um, to purge herself of food, to cause herself to vomit. Richard always maintained that, she would never do that. She would never do something that would possibly hurt her voice in that way. But when it comes out in a toxicology report, that this was present, it's obvious that she was doing these things behind the scenes. And that was, I think, one of the main things that they found in her system that pointed to the cause of death. They found um, other drugs and things, of course, that she had had prescribed from different doctors here and there.
Hmm.
And she just, I think, was having almost like a cocktail, a deadly cocktail of a variety of medications and things. So
Yeah. Right.
yeah.
So, why was Karen kept above ground?
Um, it goes along with Karen's silliness. She had such an interesting and wacky sense of humor, but Karen had told her family and friends that she never wanted to be buried if she were to die, that she didn't want to be planted, as she called it. um, and so, yeah, she was interred above ground, of course, at a mausoleum. Leave it to
Either
her to be quirky and goofy and that's such a serious topic.
I love it. I just from like what reading, watching a documentary, and then seeing her in interviews. I mean, I just love her sense of humor. You could tell she was just a fun person to be. And actually, speaking to her friends at Cafe 9, as we mentioned last time, her friends from New Haven were there, and they said the same thing. Karen was just so much fun. She had a great personality. But here's one thing. Hopefully you can clear this up for me. I don't know why Agnes would do this. So after she died, after everything happened, the husband came out of the woodwork and said, I want the photo album of the wedding." And what did Agnes do?
If I remember correctly, Agnes went ahead and sent it to him. If I'm remembering correctly,
Yeah,
the rest,
that's what she did.
yeah, the rest of the people who were around her at that time, I know the secretary who relayed the story to me said, you shouldn't send him that. That's Karen's book. He probably has um, his own copies of it or whatever. And yeah, Agnes boxed him up and sent him those.
Because as you mentioned in the book, people most likely said that he sold it. He's wanted more money.
There was definitely a lot of things that pointed to that. I've never seen proof that he tried to
Yeah.
sell her things or anything like that. But um, as far as payment was going and everything, he was paid off by the family to maintain his silence at a certain point, because he was interviewed in the very first People magazine article that came out after her death, and then he very quickly vanished.
Ah, okay.
It was later learned that I believe it was $1 million that Richard and the family had given him to just say go away and sign this.
So you think
So
maybe that's part of why Agnes gave him the book too? It's like, I don't want any more problems. Here, just take it. Just get out of my life. We don't want to see
I,
her.
I don't know. I think it's hard to try and guess what Agnes was thinking at any given point. There were other things that friends of Karen had they had given to Karen over the years, and they asked for them back after her death, saying, I'd like that as a keepsake or a memento from one of them was a bracelet. And Agnes made up some crazy story that it had been stolen. And because she didn't want to give this particular bracelet to Frenda. So yeah, I don't understand. Certain people that you would think that she would have not wanted to associate with, Tom, his husband, she wouldn't. Or she didn't even mind and sent him what he asked for. But then Karen's best friend, because she was kind of seen as a threat, I think, to Agnes at times, somebody who advocated for Karen's independence.
Yeah.
She didn't want to, give her back the bracelet.
All right. Well, let's talk about her post-death, because there's a lot that happened after she died. First of all, we mentioned a little bit last time, in 1996, her soul album was finally released. And I heard it. I actually liked it. It's got a little bit of disco. It's Karen. It's definitely a different side of Karen. And I just thought it was great. It was Billy Joel's band at the time. Paul Simon was in it. There's so many other people. And I enjoyed it very much. And we'll just refresh people's memory. Maybe they haven't seen part one in a while. One of the last things she told, what was it, the producer, Phil Ramone, we made a good fucking album. And I'm so happy that she did realize that. I mean, after all the things that people were saying, her family, closest people like Richard and Agnes were saying about the album, she knew deep down that, like, we did good. Now, I'm happy.
Yeah, he said that was the last phone call they had together, that she relayed that. And he was telling her, even though the album is not out there in the marketplace, don't feel like you didn't accomplish something really great.
Yeah.
And so yeah, luckily that did finally come out, but she never got to see it released.
How was it received by the people?
It was very quietly released, which is, there was no real promotional push or anything from it. There were a couple of TV spots that on, like Inside Edition type shows that picked up on the gossipy part of it, I guess. But most people didn't even know it was released unless they were diehard Carpenters fans watching for every new thing. So I think it sold moderately, but it didn't do nearly as well as it probably would have done in the time that she actually recorded it.
Yeah. Did Richard finally embrace it at that time?
I wouldn't say embraced it. He allowed it to be released, and basically without much comment.
Yeah.
And I think there was a little bit of him that was thought like that the public would think the same thing he did, and so if he just lets it be put out there, then maybe it would be like, see, I told you it wasn't, we've only just begun, or it wasn't Rainy Days and Mondays. But people wanted it because it was Karen, and because it was, personal to her and important to her.
Yeah. There's one thing I saw in your documentary. I'm not sure if it's available, and you can maybe help me out on this. It looks great. Todd Haynes made a movie called Superstar, also called the Barbie movie. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's remembered now as kind of the first Barbie movie, and there were several articles recently with the recent release of the Barbie movie that's been so popular, saying, basically, this isn't the first Barbie movie. The first one was Todd Haynes' biopic of Karen Carpenter.
I love it.
And so it was a 43-minute sort of experimental film. This was when he was still doing like indie stuff and college film projects. And they took a bunch of Barbie or Barbie type dolls and dressed them as the Carpenters and their parents and their friends and associates, and created this little biopic that after you watch 5 or 10 minutes of it, you kind of forget that you're watching dolls that are being moved around or repositioned from these different things. And it really is, as crazy as it sounds, it's thoughtfully done, and for being just a few years after Karen's death, they got a lot of stuff correct. For as little information was out there about her and her story and the family history and all that. They, in a lot of ways, made some assumptions, I'm sure, but they turned out to be, the truth in the end, because but yeah, it's very thoughtfully done. It's kind of horrifying and jolting to some people who think that, I know there's a certain sector of Carpenter's fans who think that it's something that is maybe disrespectful to her. But when you really look at it, and when you look at the script, and I mean, it's a tender and kind look at Karen, and I'm just my affection for it has grown over the years.
Oh, good.
Richard's reaction was, of course, for a number of reasons, um, very negative, and understandably, because Todd Haynes did reach out to him at that time, or to his to the record company, and tried to, I guess, get permission to include some songs in this, and his request was, of course, denied. And they didn't want some little indie movie doing this, and so Todd Haynes went ahead with it, and that's what Richard Carpenter came back on and said, he's violated the copyright and that sort of thing.
Richard, you said for many reasons. One of them was because copyright issues. He used songs, had the money taken out of theaters. Is there any place you can find the movie now?
I mean, the natural place to go to is YouTube, and I think the versions of it there have improved over the years. So if you find one that's been there for 12 years or so, it's probably not the best quality. Mm-hmm. But even the best quality one I've ever seen is still pretty rough and hard to watch at times because of the quality. I did hear, though, that I think it's the film school at UCLA possibly is doing some sort of restoration on the film, and copyright laws have changed in such a way since then that there's people crossing fingers that it might actually get to see release, because if they can prove that it's a parody, and somehow parody is something that kind of, along with fair use and different things like that, that it can possibly be released in a way that it couldn't have been back in 1987 or in the years following that. So we'll see. I'm just excited that they're working on restoring it, touching it up, and making it, I think, a little more viewable to everybody, because there's never been a good copy of it.
Right. Well, my fingers are crossed. I would love to see that. It sounds great. So after Karen died, did Richard continue with music?
He did. He, of course, continued to remix and re-release a lot of the Carpenters' music catalog, and in some cases did some other albums with their outtakes and things like that from different albums. Outtakes from their Christmas album, there was enough there to release a second Christmas album in 1984. He did his own solo album in 1987 called Time, but he's just not a solo recording artist. I think his forte was behind the scenes and surrounding Karen's voice in such a way that it worked. And he could do that with other singers, but I don't think the magic was the same. And he lost his muse, and so I don't think that it was ever the same for him after that. And so most of his best work since then has been working with the Carpenters recordings, adding orchestrations to things that they never completely finished back then. And there's been most recently the album that he did with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra in London, and that's really got some beautiful stuff that's going on there. But again, Richard's level of control is something that I think ends up impeding progress at times too, because whereas a lot of the other groups or artists that have done these albums with the Royal Philharmonic, there's been a lot less control from the artist. They've kind of let the Philharmonic rearrange things and do things in a new way. And Richard ended up taking back all these recordings to LA and remixing and doing them all himself, versus leaving it in the hands of the people who have done these other Royal Philharmonic albums. So it's definitely on brand for him. I mean, it's great music, but some of the recordings you're like, wait, what did they change? What's the, what's
Yeah.
different? And yeah, the control and that is still there, and I think it will be as long as he's with us. He's the keeper of the flame, and rightfully so, as the only surviving member of the group. But
Yeah.
I think there's still so much that can be celebrated and possibly even released, having to do with Karen, if he could kind of give up the reins a little bit.
It sounds like with he and Agnes, the acorn does not fall far from the tree. A lot of control issues there, unfortunately. So on that solo album you mentioned, did he actually sing himself?
On some of the tracks, there were a few instrumentals. There were some guest vocalists. Dionne Warwick did a song. Dusty Springfield did one of the, I think the only one that was released as a single, at least here in the United States. Um, and I think it was like a top 20 song, called Something in Your Eyes with Dusty Springfield. But again, it's just he didn't continue on with it after that. It's not the same as having worked with Karen, these other artists. They, phenomenal voices, Dusty Springfield, Dionne Warwick. But I don't know. It's again, you look at the control thing. The Dusty Springfield song was released as a single with Richard's name as the primary artist, and then in parentheses with Dusty Springfield.
Oh
But
man.
it's her singing the entire thing. Most producers, most arrangers don't put their name first.
Yeah.
I mean, you can think of hardly any that
No.
would do that, and then kind of an afterthought for Dusty Springfield. Like, he should have been proud to boldly put her name first, and himself as her arranger. But that's just not the way he works. And it came out with a picture sleeve and a sheet music, official sheet music publication, but it had Richard's picture on the cover.
Yeah. Well, as we mentioned in part one, he was always worried about being second fiddle to Karen, to even I think was it Jack Doherty his name? He got mad because
Yeah,
he was getting all the he was taking all the
production
not taking all
credit.
he was getting the credit, so he fired him as the producer. I mean, he was so worried about not being taken as I'm the guy who does everything. I'm the one who does all the arrangements. I mean, people knew that he was the arranger. They knew he picked the songs. So he didn't really. He just for some reason there was a lot of insecurity with that, and it just shows even until recently. Did
Mhm.
Petula Clark ever sing a song? Because I know that she was so fond of Karen and she helped her out a couple times.
She did a song with Richard. He had talked for a long time about doing a Christmas album of instrumentals and then getting some guest vocalists and that sort of thing. Petula recorded a song with Richard. Oh, it's probably been close to 20 years ago now. But that the album never came out. I think the song itself came out on some special edition of something that Petula was releasing anyway. But yeah, so they did work together, and he appeared on a TV special
Oh.
that Petula had for PBS.
Well, what I love about this post death, the Carpenters were bigger than ever because I mean there was a Carpenters tribute band that sold out the London Palladium just like the Carpenters did. So that's
Yeah.
very impressive. It's not even the real Carpenters; it's a tribute band playing their music, and they sold out the Palladium. And then there was a lot of documentaries done. You've done several, and then the Carpenters movie that we talked about with Cynthia Gibb was the
Mhm.
highest rated on network in 5 years. And they came out. He released was it the album Love Lines was their 13th album posthumously, and then he greatest hits album. So after she died, the music just continues to live on. People love the Carpenters more than ever now, and I love that. So I'm happy to see that she's definitely not forgotten. She's gone, unfortunately, but she's not forgotten.
Well, the voice, I mean, the fact that we do have the recordings and that those recordings can live forever. Um, I don't think that her voice will go away anytime soon. She's still in, countdowns of the greatest vocalists of all time. And I think there is an appreciation for her nowadays that maybe wasn't even present by a mass audience whenever she was here during her own time.
Yep. I think one of the reasons is on September 13th, 1994, an album came out called If I Were a Carpenter. And all these alternative rock bands like Sonic Youth, Cranberry, Sheryl Crow, Cracker, Matthew Sweet, Four Non Blondes, I think they released an album of just all their versions of Carpenter songs. I think doing things like that where people maybe who weren't exposed to the Carpenters
Yeah.
hear their favorite bands go, whoa, what's this? This sounds great. So I love the fact that, there's there as you said, either in the book or documentary, they became retro cool.
Retro cool, yeah. I read that somewhere, and I think I've stolen it and used it quite a bit since then. But yeah, people started kind of looking back, going, okay, maybe they weren't so corny, or maybe if they were corny, we like that now, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was sort of the start of that retro cool thing, and I think that continues to today. You know, you see so many reaction videos on YouTube now. It's kind of interesting to watch, where somebody listens to the Carpenters recording for the very first time ever, and the look on their faces, wow, what is this? And I've played it for my students. I'm an elementary music teacher, and I know there were several times that I played it years ago and asked the kids, what did you think of this voice or whatever? And some of them were like, well, is it a boy or a girl? Because it's such a unique low voice.
Yeah.
They didn't even know where to classify it because there's no other voice like it. And they liked the songs and everything, but they were so puzzled by the voice because there's just nobody else that sounds that way.
Yeah. Well, what I love about her voice, and people have said this in numerous interviews I've seen, I think Dan Warwick was one of them, that said the first 3 seconds, it's Karen Carpenter. She has such a distinct voice. There's no way you can mistake her for anybody else. And even people that don't like that kind of music, everybody always says she has the voice of an angel. I've had so many people when I was telling people I was doing my interview with you, that's the first thing they said. It's like, she had the best voice, the voice of an angel. And even they're like, some of my friends are more metalheads and they don't even really like that music, but they can appreciate her and her voice and her talent. And I love that. Speaking
Absolutely.
of appreciation, as of when I was getting ready for the interview, they were never inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I don't even think it should be called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think it should be called the Music Hall of Fame, because now it's not really rock and roll. I mean, you have people like, rap, country, whatever, everybody, there should be an appreciation for all types of music, but that's why I think they should change it to the Music Hall of Fame. Were they ever inducted at any time?
No, I think there was some sort of a popular music hall of fame at one point that was trying to gain some momentum. There was a vocal group hall of fame that was like a little small startup thing at one point. But yeah, it's usually some sort of a political thing that gets people into the Hall of Fame or not.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be hard at this point for the Carpenters there would have to be somebody on the inside that was, rooting for them. Because I think all of the write-ins and things like that people have done, and people taking polls and stuff like that, trying to convince them that this is a group that needs to be in there for whatever reason. It hasn't worked out, but I don't know. I think you're right. They're definitely, if there's going to be a Hall of Fame, it's just a pop music Hall of Fame overall versus rock, because as we've seen, even Dolly Parton recently said, I don't deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and then she even declined, and then they came back and said, no, we want to give this to you, and she said, well, okay, but then she went and recorded a rock album. So
I love that. And I love when she came out on stage. I mean, I didn't hear the new album yet. I'm not sure if it's released. I know the whole story, but I know she came out with Rob Halford and Pink and all these different people on stage when she was inducted and sang a rock song. And I loved it. I know you have to go, and I would love to talk about, because you're part of Dolly Parton's America's podcast. I would love to talk about that sometime. Maybe you'll have to have you on again, because I'm a
I would love that. We could talk Dolly for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. But let's get back. We'll finish now, because I know we're on a time frame here. But so as I mentioned before, I saw you were on the with the New Haven documentary tour or something. It was called, I forgot, New Haven Documentaries. So I saw you at Cafe 9. The next day you were at Hampton Best Video. Where else did you go on tour with that?
We've gone to a variety of film festivals, starting with the Santa Barbara Film Festival, where it premiered back in February. And we've gone to Sedona, Arizona, Sonoma, California. We were in more closer to this fall, we were in Wichita, Kansas, Cape Cod. I mean, it's just kind of been everywhere. And oh, and even London. Right before the thing in New Haven, I was in London for a festival at that point. So we've been able to show it at a lot of different places, but there's still so many fans that haven't got to see it. And like you mentioned before, it is coming back to New Haven. They asked for kind of a um, kind of an encore screening, and so our producers arranged for that to happen. And I think, is that next Friday? I'm
Yes,
not mistaken.
next Friday at 7 p.m. at Hampton Best Video and Cultural Center. I love that place. Anybody who lives in Connecticut, you have to check that out. It's not only, I mean, believe it or not, there is still a video store left, DVD that they. But I used to do stand-up comedy. I did a show there. They have so many different events there. Besides having the best of all movies in every genre, every language, it's just such a great place. And what I was most impressed about was I didn't get a chance to go see you last time in Hamden because I was working, but I did see you at Cafe 9. I think it was sold out at Cafe 9. I know it was sold out at Best Video. So did you have that kind of reaction everywhere you went?
I didn't get to be at the best video,
Oh,
as I say, performance, but screening. I
yeah.
only got to be at the one at Cafe Nine. So they did screen it there, but we didn't have a talk back or anything. We had to get back home for
Uh,
real life stuff to to begin. But
Life always gets in the way.
yeah, but I'm glad they're bringing it back there too. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be there next Friday, but it'll be interesting to hear. Hopefully, they'll sell out another screening of it.
Yeah, well, I will definitely keep you updated on that. So the last question I have for you is this ever going to become available for people to buy?
Yes, we have a distribution plan that's getting ready to roll out, and um, I'll give you the long story short. It's going to be available sometime during the month of January
Yes.
via sort of a pay-per-view kind of thing, a special preview or premiere release for really for the diehard fans, the people who are just waiting, and some who have been quite upset that it's taken so long, or um, that didn't really understand the whole film festival circuit and how that thing works. And they're
Yeah.
like, why don't you just put it for free on YouTube? And it's like, well, that's not really how it works. You're looking for a distribution deal. You're trying to get it out there and not give it away for free on YouTube until the very last, resort or whatever. But it is going to be available for a pay per view sort of thing, followed shortly thereafter by an appearance on Amazon Prime. So that's when it's really going to be, I think, available to the masses. There will be a point in time, probably by summer or later in the year, that we have a DVD that we've been working on with about an hour of extra bonus features and things. And at some point, it will go to like Tubi and some of the free streamers, and after everybody else has kind of had a chance to see it on these other platforms.
Yep.
So
Well, as
that's
I mentioned in part one, as I've seen many documentaries, probably other ones that you have done, because I know you've done E True Hollywood Story and VH1, but this by far is the most in-depth, comprehensive, honest documentary I've ever seen on the Carpenters. I learned so much about them on this documentary, and I really do appreciate you coming on the show. It was such a fun time.
my
You're
pleasure.
such an interesting guest, and I could talk about the Carpenters forever. I'm a huge fan, so I know I'm going to be getting it on pay-per-view. I'm going to watch it on Amazon, and I'm going to buy the DVD for the extras. I am one of those people that's a diehard Carpenter fan, and I am
Right.
so happy for all your success with this because
Thank
you
you.
definitely deserve it. And I have to have you back for Dolly Parton because I'm a huge
That would
Dolly
be
Parton
fun,
fan.
definitely. That would be a lot
Yeah,
of fun.
it would
And
be
in the meantime, if people want to know more about the pay-per-view thing that's coming up and how that rollout's going to work, Karen Carpenter doc.com, doc.com is where people can find out information, sign up for the mailing list. And it's those people who have signed up for the mailing list and ask for, extra information that'll be getting this first invitation. So excited to see that rolling out here very soon.
Well, I know we've only talked between part one and two for only 3.5 hours, so it's been a short interview. Is there anything that I left out that you want to mention before we go?
Oh gosh. Just how grateful I am to the fans around the world for their
Yeah.
support of this, and even fans who are collectors or who have rare photographs and things like that. People who have lent their footage to us, their images to us, and things to make this documentary, even more special than it would have been. So grateful to all of them, and fans from all over the world have come together really to encourage and support me over the years. So I'm very grateful for that.
Right. Do you have anything new that you're working on right now that you could talk about or mention?
Working on another documentary project with AMS, something that won't hopefully take us 4 years. And I don't think I can say what it is just yet, but stay tuned. Something else that I have always loved and wanted to get to explore a little more. So that will be forthcoming hopefully later this year.
All right. I'm no psychic, but I know Randy Schmidt's going to be back on the Claus Corner to talk about that, Dolly Parton, and much more.
We love that.
Randy, it was so great having you on the show. Right now it's December 30th, so have a very happy new year.
Thank you.
Glad
You
you're
too.
feeling better, and we will be talking soon.
All right. Take care.
That wraps up the latest episode of the Claus Corner. A huge thanks goes up to author, creative consultant, and producer Randy Schmidt for taking time out of his extremely busy schedule to be a guest on my show. Once again, thank you very much. I also need to thank editor extraordinaire John Bristol of the award-winning Elmwood Productions for always doing a superb job editing this show each and every week and making it available all on YouTube. I am also extremely grateful to Rob Bull and Joseph Timothy Quirk for all they do to make my show available on several Connecticut radio stations, as well as Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, Audible, and iHeartRadio. Thank you both very much. And lastly, but definitely not least, I need to thank you, the viewer, for always tuning in. Enjoy your day, everyone.
Come on, suckers! All of a sudden I hear, brim, brim.
What's a diaphragm again?
Ha! We caught one.
They're supposed to be weird.
Oh, yeah, no. If you say so.
I've always wanted to be in a movie.
Waiting around for autumn, waiting around for autumn, I was